Welcome back. Joining me in the studio is Dr Kylie Moore-Gilbert, a Middle Eastern researcher at the University of Melbourne and specialist in Gulf politics. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a bit about your career and how did you become interested in the Middle East?
Oh gosh, following high school I spent a period of a few years backpacking around the world. So I travelled to a lot of Middle Eastern countries, and this was pre-Arab Spring. The Middle East was a little bit more stable than it is today.
Yeah.
So I had the opportunity to visit a lot of states which perhaps might be a bit dangerous today, like Syria, for example. And yeah, I just really fell in love with the people, the culture, the food, the languages. It really piqued my interest.
Very impressive.
Thank you.
Why did you study the Gulf in particular?
The Gulf is really interesting. I feel like it's often overlooked because up until perhaps recent times, it's been one of the more stable, less volatile, less politically volatile, certainly, parts of the region. Also, I was actually in the Emirates, in Dubai, when the Arab Spring was kicking off in Bahrain. So I just remember being really, really interested. I remember watching Al Jazeera from my hotel room, seeing Bahrainis or Bahraini supporters in the streets. They weren't protesting or anything like that. I mean, I think that would be a step too far even in Dubai. But I remember seeing people walking through the streets with Bahraini flags draped across their shoulders and being kind of interested in what's going on. Even in the Emirates, you know, seeing that wasn't even in Bahrain.
So before the break, we started to look at the structure of the region. Can you explain more about what the GCC is?
So the GCC was formed in 1981, if I'm not mistaken. Basically, it comprises Saudi Arabia and all of the small, largely wealthy, developed oil or gas exporting states in the Persian or Arab Gulf. And it's, I guess, an economic, political, and to a certain extent security bloc, arguably there to counter Iranian influence in the region.
Well put.
Thank you.
How has the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran developed over time, and how does it manifest in the region?
It's very complex. I think, again, it goes back to the Iranian Revolution.
Yeah.
It goes back to both states claim to be like an Islamic state in a way, or to be the bearers of political Islam and that authenticity and legitimacy that goes with it. But Iran being, I guess, the most important, most dominant Shia country in the region, sort of set itself up as a Shia alternative or a Shia version of political Islam. So it has deep roots, and a lot of it, I mean, I don't want your viewers to think that it is a religious conflict, because I don't think it is. It's a political rivalry, first and foremost. But we've seen this rivalry ebb and flow over the decades, mainly since the Iranian Revolution.
So in terms of the current crisis between Saudi Arabia, predominantly with Qatar, which side have local and international states taken?
I don't know actually if Saudi Arabia is the predominant actor in the bloc that is targeting Qatar. The UAE is also very influential.
Yeah.
And there are some analysts that say that the UAE played a major role in driving this too, together with Saudi Arabia. Obviously Egypt has as well, but this is definitely a Gulf crisis that Egypt has, for a variety of reasons, become involved in. So within the bloc we've also got Bahrain, which is very much a junior partner. I don't really think they had much of a choice whether or not to participate.
Yeah.
You know, I've argued in my own work that they've essentially ceded control over foreign policy to Saudi Arabia. So if the Saudis say jump, they essentially say how high in terms of, you know, foreign policy. So you've got Bahrain, you've got Egypt. Further afield, interestingly, it looked like at the very beginning that the US was supporting this move against Qatar. At least, you know, Donald Trump's tweets and the sort of initial messages coming out of Washington suggested that.
Yeah.
But we've seen them backtrack very quickly. I'm sure somebody within the administration reminded the White House of Qatar's importance economically in terms of defence as well.
And thank God for that.
And yeah, thank God for that. So US is kind of trying to balance both sides. And I do think if this was to be resolved, the US would have to play an important role in mediating that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your take on what led to the sudden escalation of the crisis and why the four states took such a drastic action?
The timing is really interesting. I don't think many Gulf analysts expected this.
Yeah.
We did see a similar event in 2014, which was resolved fairly swiftly. I think it took about 8 months. And most observers of the region thought that perhaps initially this could be a rerun of that 2014 spat, and it is, it's an extension of that, but this is much deeper and much more serious and has much more far-reaching ramifications. The most common explanation as to why now is the Trump factor, I guess. Trump's first overseas visit was to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and you have speculation that he gave some sort of green light or some sort of assurance to Mohammed bin Salman, the new Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, for example, that taking action against Qatar would receive some sort of US sanction, for example, that they would not welcome it, but that they wouldn't step in to prevent it, let's say.
Definitely.
But we don't know. We don't know what went on behind the scenes there. Obviously, something happened based on, Trump's tweets. We can see that conversations were had behind the scenes. However, it's really just speculation. So Qatar, it was always sort of an uneasy presence within the GCC. It was a bit of the odd one out in many senses, and that is deep-rooted. The timing is interesting. The fact that it happened, in retrospect, of course, you can see signs that not everything was right in the GCC-Qatar relationship for some time, retrospectively looking back.
Yeah, do you see the blockade being lifted and diplomatic relations being restored?
I do think the blockade will be lifted at some point. It's very dangerous to predict the future, of course.
Yeah. It's very fickle right now.
Yeah, definitely. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, this region is so volatile at the moment. So much has just come out of left field. We don't know what will happen. I do think, though, both sides, certainly the blockade, the Saudi UAE-led bloc, have overplayed their hand.
Yeah.
And it's been counterproductive to their objectives. They've pushed Qatar into the hands of Iran. Their objective was the opposite. They wanted to split Qatar away from Iran. So they've sort of shot themselves in the foot with that one, for example. I mean, I think...
Good analogy.
They have, though. They have. Economically as well. They thought that they could choke off, resources and supplies to Qatari citizens, for example. But Turkey stepped in, Iran stepped in. Even countries like Oman, which are in the GCC but have tried to remain neutral, are still trading with Qatar.
Yeah.
So it sort of backfired. And I think that Qatar obviously wants it to come to some sort of conclusion. I mean, they don't want this situation to keep going. And I think it's not in the long-term interests of the blockading side also to keep this going. I think the biggest problem really is the need for both to find a means of saving face. So it doesn't look like one has backed down and one has, the other side's been victorious over them. I think, saving face is a very important, I guess, value in the Gulf, in their traditional values as well. So they're going to have to find...
Politics.
Exactly. Nobody wants to be seen as, the loser who's backed down or something.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to have to find a solution whereby both sides look like they're getting something, some sort of concession, and they're able to walk away from it.
Yeah.
That being said, this could be the nail in the coffin of the GCC. We don't know whether... I don't think they can go back to the status quo that they were in before. I don't think Qatar can forgive and forget. And I don't think... It will be very difficult for them to re-establish trust. So whether or not Qatar remains in the GCC, even if the blockade is lifted, who knows?
Yeah, so many things to consider. We're unfortunately running out of time and are going to have to go to a break, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Stick around. When we get back, we're sharing a few of our favourite travel stories that have been sent in by viewers.